We live? We're all live. Okay. Hey guys, Jordan Belfort here. Weekly intensive. I got a special surprise. So I said yesterday. The topic's going to be a surprise. Well, here's the surprise. So this is the weekend that every twice a year I do a really ultra high end mastermind with people very successful that already have made a ton of money and they're looking to take it to the next level. And the great thing about a mastermind is it's not so much that I'm just here training people. It's really everyone here has expertise and has a unique outlook based on the things they've done in their life, where they live, the market they cater to. And so much of about a mastermind group is not even what happens at the mastermind. It's about what happens after the mastermind, the relationships that you make there, the networking opportunities, and so forth. So we just started. We're here in Beverly Hills. A good friend of mine, a guy named Roman James. He's the #1 developer in the world, probably. I mean, number one or two. And he builds houses for the ultra rich. This particular house, which he built, is on the market for like $45 million. And I'll probably take you for a little tour later, separately after this ends, just a quick to show you. Then later this afternoon, he's taking us all to another house he built, which is I think the most expensive house in the world right now, right? Is it? Yeah, he built this house. We'll take a video for you as well. It's a $250 million house. I mean, you're not even gonna believe this fucking house. And it's like you can move in. He built it. You can move in. You need the fucking toothbrush is all you need, basically. Everything else is there. Okay. They even have someone that blows. No, I'm just kidding. But Roman wanted that, but he was scared it wasn't politically correct. Okay. But anyway, no. But the house is it comes with cars. Like it comes with a helicopter. You never see anything like it. It's fucking insane. All right. Anyway, so. What I want to do today is I want to make today a little special because I thought it would be really good to have some other people that could answer your questions too. Some very successful people here, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take about 40, 50%, no, not 60% of this training. I want to cover a topic that I think is just one of the most important things you can ever learn to do in your life, and that is how to tell stories, the art of telling a great story. And I know it will be very relevant to everyone who's here today with me here, at this home, and also no matter who you are, what you do for a living, and even outside of business. This goes beyond business. Let me tell you something. For business, for selling, for persuading, the ability to tell a great story is like it's one of the most important things you can ever learn to do. Beyond, and let's put closing aside, because if you can't fucking close, you're a fucking worthless moron who should just leave the planet Earth, right? But the point is, beyond the simple, obvious truth that the straight line is showing you how to close, there's another aspect to communication, and that is the art of just being interesting. The art of being able to hold someone's attention. The art of being able to take someone who's a customer and really get into a much deeper level of rapport. Because remember, the rules of the game of the straight line are like, you don't want to go off to Pluto before someone's a customer. Now, obviously, with a very long sales cycle, with super big players, a little bit different. But the point is, in a regular traditional sales cycle, you want to keep the line of questioning relevant, the conversation relevant. But once you close the person, then it's all about going outside that into their personal life, what makes them feel alive outside of work. And also when you're working on bigger accounts with longer sales cycles, let me tell you something. You're gonna have to be not so much going off to Pluto, but you're gonna have to be able to tell stories to people about your life, and also have in a way that brings them back into the game. In other words, if I'm out there in a business setting telling stories, I want to make sure that I'm not just telling stories for the sake of telling stories. I'm doing it with an outcome in mind. I'm framing a certain point, and then I'm using. By which camera am I supposed to be looking at? Hey, which one is the main camera?
That one.
Oh, good. I thought for a second I'm looking in the wrong fucking camera. I'm like, what? It's you I'm looking at. Okay. So anyway, I guess one of the things. You notice everyone's got a certain type of chair. I have a different chair because of my back here, right? So I'm in this shitty chair that reclines, right? Anyway, one of the things that it's a natural gift I've had since I'm a kid, right? I could tell a fucking story like there's no one else's business. In fact, one of the people here today, Kyle, said the funniest story he's ever heard in his life was the whole YouTube story I told, right? I don't know if you guys have all heard this, right? But, I tell a story about the yacht sinking, right? And I told that was actually a tape that was made. It's not, you check it out. Yeah, it's really funny. And it's basically some animations accompanying my story, right? But the story itself, you know, when I tell the story, for me, it's very effortless. And anytime I tell a story, it's just effortless for me. And people laugh and they're engaged. But yet when I hear other people tell stories, sometimes they kind of suck at it. Like the stories just aren't interesting. And it's not because they haven't lived interesting lives. You get it? It's not because they don't have interesting stories to tell. They just don't know how to tell them. And so there's two parts of this. Number one is, how do you just fucking tell a story to be interesting? So you can communicate with people like, you know, opposite sex, same sex, whatever your personal is. I don't give a shit which way you go, okay? But the point is, how do you attract human beings to want to essentially engage with you, right? Storytelling is the oldest form of communication, and it's really all goes back to the campfire. The reason that storytelling is so effective in selling is that it goes back to how we learned in the caveman days. You're sitting around a campfire and information was passed down through the telling of stories. If you look at what's the best-selling book of all time? Is what? The Bible. It's one giant story, right? Now, some people say it's true, others say it's not. Some say it's loose interpretation. It doesn't matter. The point is, it's one hell of a fucking story, right? So when I was going out there and started doing trainings, this has been back in 2010, when I first started really going out formally into the world and doing this stuff, right? I'd always done it for my own businesses, but I started training other people, and I started getting this, you know, people saying, my God, your stories are so funny, they're so great, we were laughing so hard, can you tell this story, can you tell that story, right? And I almost felt like I was like, and then even my own friends, when I wrote my books, they're like, you know, people like me, can you tell me this story, that, and they'd be rolling, and then I started realizing that when people would tell their stories, they kind of like sucked. You know, and I say, is it just because I've lived that insane a life? Well, maybe I have. But it's not just that. It's the way I tell it. So I started saying to myself, okay, well, maybe let me try to do the same thing I did with the straight line system, is let me actually dissect this. First of all, do I have a strategy for telling stories? I started thinking about it. Like, is there a formula I use? Because what happens typically is things that you do really, really well, you're using a strategy, you're just doing it unconsciously. You don't think about it. So for some whatever it was, my brain was wired in a certain way that I naturally cracked the code for telling a great story. And I'm not the only great storyteller. There's great storytellers out there in the world, right? So the point is, I come up with a formula for telling a story, and it allowed me to make even things that weren't that interesting really interesting. My wife says, you know, honestly, the way you talk sometimes, you could read the fucking phone book and you make it sound interesting, right? So, and you know, I assure you I don't read the phone book every night, but I can do that, and there's a reason why. So I actually spent some time a bunch of years ago, and I figured out what I was doing, and I actually made it into a strategy, like a step-by-step strategy, and then I put a formula around it for business. So it shows you, A, how to tell a story to get a certain point across in business, to frame a certain point, right? So you could use this strategy both for, you know, in your own life, just to be interesting and funny when you want to tell a story in a crowd or in a social engagement, right? Or you could use it to frame a certain point in business, right? So I'm going to first go through, and I've broken it down here. I think altogether, I have 8 steps here. Let me just make sure there are 8 steps. 1, 2, 3, 4, 8 steps, okay? So I have 8 steps. I'm going to go through 8 steps first, all 8 steps, all right? And then I'm going to actually tell you a story myself and just watch how I do it, okay? And then what we'll probably do is, depending on, you know, I can fucking talk, I know that. So if we have time, maybe one of these guys will tell a story here, and I'll show what they do wrong. Because when I do this in live seminars where, like, I'll teach the art of storytelling and everyone gets it. I call them on stage, and when they try to do it, they make really blaring errors. And if I correct them just a little bit, within like 15 minutes, they're telling amazing stories. So we'll see if we can get to that. If not, you can do this on your own. It's just like start telling your story and tape yourself, and then you can actually see the mistakes that you make. So let's go through the points one by one, okay? It starts off is that what you want to do is, in a business setting, okay, you frame the point first. I'll give you an example here. One of the stories I always tell is about something that I'm going to cover here this weekend is state management. And you guys, I've covered this last week, in fact, how to trigger a peak state, right, with anchoring. So again, just to refresh everyone's recollection, state management is the ability to trigger an empowered state at will regardless of what's going on you in the environment. So in other words, you could be having a terrible day. You could be feeling negative inside. You could be feeling uncertain about things. You're not feeling overly confident. You could even be feeling overwhelmed. But you're about to enter a situation of influence, and you have that ability in a moment's notice to trigger a state of absolute certainty, of confidence, of clarity, to the point where you feel it. That's state management, right? And I have to tell you that the ability to manage your state is one of the most crucial things that you can master when it comes to selling. Because in the absence of that, you really can't sell very well. Because remember what I always said to you, now what I'm doing here is I'm doing this on purpose here. I'm framing a point here. What I'm doing is I'm framing a point, which is that state management is fucking crucial. You must know how to do it. And if you don't know how to do it, it's going to really impede you from being a top closer, because here's the deal. Because at the highest level, sales is the transference of emotion, right? Here's my point, my main thesis. At the highest level, sales is the transference of emotion. And the primary emotion that you're transferring is what? Certainty. Certainty that your product is the best, that is a perfect fit for them. Certainty that you're someone they can trust and connect with. Certainty that your company is someone they can trust. And like the 3 ten's, right? And as I always say, the certainty doesn't come from the straight line. The straight line doesn't create certainty. It transfers certainty. The certainty has to come from within you. Straight line doesn't create. That's the mistake people make. So if you walk around in a glum, negative, uncertain state, and you try to use the straight line system, you have nothing to transfer. It's almost like the metaphor is, I said, is imagine a house, right? And your house has got a boiler downstairs or a furnace, and that furnace creates heat, right? And then there's this duct work all throughout the house, the HVAC system, right? And that HVAC system allows the heat to go from the basement to all the rooms in the house, right? So imagine in sales, the straight line system is the duct work, and you are the furnace. So if the furnace is broken, you could have the most elaborate, perfectly constructed ductwork, copper tubing, insulated, perfect. No heat is dissipated, goes to every room. But if the furnace is broken, can you heat the rooms? No. You have nothing to transfer. That's why it's so important to be able to manage your state. In fact, let me tell you a story. And here I go. So when I'm trying to frame a point, I really take the time. The setup is as important as the story. Before I tell you a story, I'm going to tell you now a really funny story, which maybe you'll remember. I've told it many times, right? But I don't just tell a story. I really hammer home the importance of a certain point, because that raises the stakes for the story. And I'll be so serious about the story, about the frame, and then I'll tell a funny fucking story. All right? So now watch. I say, listen. In fact, let me tell you. Back my first job out of college, I went to dental school for one day, right? I dropped out, and then I went and started selling meat and seafood door to door, right? And the first person I meet, their way of training salesmen, they put me in a truck with another salesman. His name's the Pegman because he walks like a stick up his ass, and everyone starts to laugh, right? The first thing I do is called a pattern interrupt, okay? So that's it. So let's say number one is I frame a point, right? Number two is I use a pattern interrupt. I say something that's a bit weird or funny or offhanded. In this case, I'm going to tell you a story about a guy who is the Penguin, okay? And the reason he's the Penguin is because he walks around like this, whiling. This is going to fucking stick up his ass, so everyone calls him the Penguin. Burgess Meredith from Batman had nothing on this fucking guy, a Danny DeVito, right? That's the Penguin. So I always, if I tell a story about my yacht sinking, right, I'll say, here's how I tell the story of my yacht sinking. I'll say, okay, here's the story. Okay, you all want to know the story? Great. Let me just start by saying this. There are 4 phases to a Quaalude high. Everyone's like, what? 4 phases? And I interrupt, it's called a pattern interrupt. I start off in a way that's like, what? It grabs everyone's attention, and it changes their state, and makes them, what's he saying? And I use a pattern interrupt, okay? So that's step number 2. I always start my stories with a pattern interrupt. In this case, I'm telling you a story of estate management. My first job, real job out of college after I dropped out of dental school, was selling meat and seafood door to door. And I had to train with another salesperson, an experienced salesperson. That was their system, sit in the truck with someone else. And this guy's name was the Penguin because he had a stick up his ass. He'd waddle around, right? And that's the story. So that's like the pattern interrupt to the story, right? The next thing is with stories, okay, for business, is don't be afraid to tell a personal story. This is a big one here. People have a habit of telling stories about other things that don't relate to them. The story will never be as good if you are not in it. And here's the thing. We all have stories that we can find. You know, when I first started speaking publicly, right, to other people, not my own companies, I started thinking, wow, I need to have stories to tell, right? And I started realizing that as I would move through life, everything became a story. So it was like every day there's a story in what goes on in your life. And once you start getting into the habit of telling stories, you'll start saying, you go back and start to remember, you have a million stories to tell about your life, about the people that you know, the experiences that you've had. I have stories for everything, all right? And I didn't have to make them up or invent experiences. I don't care what you do for a living, who you are, what you've done, you have stories to tell. So don't be scared to tell a personal story. Don't just say, oh, let me tell you a story about my friend Joe. It's much more impactful when you're telling a story about yourself in the first person. You're the voyeur looking out and telling the story. So personal stories have a much larger impact than stories that are told about other people. They're just never as good, okay? Number 4, tell the story with, this is the big one, this is your first big tip here. Ready? Use active dialogue. What I always do when I tell a story is I will get to a certain point in the story, and then I switch it into actually telling you the story as if you were there. In other words, well, watch the story with the penguin, right? So let me tell you the story about estate management, right? And, you know, my first job out of college, right? My real, after, you know, I shoveled driveways, I sold meat, I shoveled driveways, I did ices, but the first real job was selling meat and seafood door to door. Boxes of shrimps, lobsters, right? And I walked into this, you know, I answered an ad in the paper, and it was a warehouse full of like 12 guys, you know, in these beat up pickup trucks, right? They had freezer boxes in the back, and they were going door to door, just to homes actually, and businesses, and selling home freezer plans, right? And their system of training sales was simple. They say, you know, you're gonna put you in a truck and with an experienced salesman, so to speak, right? And you're just gonna mirror them, watch them, what they do all day long, and then, you know, do that for a day, and they'll give you your own truck, right? So they put me with the salesman named the Penguin, right? So the Penguin's like this, you know, he's got 5'6", he walks around wild with a stick up his ass, right? So I meet the Penguin, and the first thing the Penguin says to me is this. He says, the key to sales, and look what I do. And now I go in, and I bring you into the story, and I say, and the first thing so the Penguin, we get in the truck, and the first thing the Penguin says to me, he turns to me and goes, listen, the key to selling is you gotta be pumped up and positive. So I'm like, okay, he goes, listen, no matter what you do, if they slam the door in your face, no matter how many times they say no, just always say, have a nice day. And I'm like, why? I say, just say, I said, why? He goes, because it makes you feel better about yourself. So I'm like, okay. Penguin's like, watch. So what I've done now is rather than just saying, I went down, I got in the truck, and the Penguin said to me, he said to me that, you know, the key was that you had to be, remain pumped and positive, and whatever they say to you, you're supposed to, I don't say it, I say, and the Penguin turns to me and he says. So I bring you into the story using active dialogue. So watch, let me do it again, we use grammar here. So we get in the truck, right? And the Penguin turns to me, not he turned to me, and he didn't turn to me and said, that's past tense. So we get inside the truck, and the Penguin turns to me and he says, now where are you? You're in the present tense with me. I bring you inside the story, and I tell the story in the present tense. It dramatically increases their investment in the story. You bring them in to the story, okay? So anytime I tell a story, you'll notice I'll go so far And they'll say, and then, so I'm saying the yacht was sinking, so we all go down there, and my wife turns to me, she says, my bags aren't here. I'm like, what? And the fucking driver forgot the bags. So I said, honey, don't worry about it. I bring you in with active dialogue. If you notice people who don't tell good stories, they only tell you what happened. They don't bring you in and actually tell you what people said line by line. You get it? So you have to bring people into your story with active dialogue, okay? Move on to number 5, okay? Again, and this is part of that, is I always tell the story in the moment. I go through the whole entire story as it was happening. So watch. So we get in the car. He says, the key is you got to stay pumped up and positive, and no matter how many times the door gets slammed in your face, just always say, have a nice day. So I'm like, why? He goes, because it makes you feel better about yourself. You feel good. I said, all right, well, it sounds like it makes sense. So I said, all right. So the Penguin drives up the car. We go to this little town up in Westchester. He gets out of the car, and he waddles up to the freaking car, and I always try to use humor a little bit, right? And he knocks on the first door, and a woman opens the door. Again, a woman opens the door. Not, he walked up to the door, a woman opened the door, and she opens the door, and he says, hi, my name's Elliot. Slam. And he goes, have a nice day, right? And I bring you, and I start telling, and I go through the entire story, blow by blow, in the story. I don't tell it as if it happened 8 years ago. I start off in the past tense, but I jump in the middle, and I tell you the story in the present tense as if it's happening now, okay? Next, here's the big one. Now, along with that, the devil is in the details. Here's a big one. People that don't tell good stories tend to under-describe what was actually happening. They don't tell you what someone was wearing, what people looked like, what the surroundings were like. They skim over it. Oh, we went to this beautiful house. No. We walked to this gigantic red brick house with gigantic Corinthian columns rising up on either side. The door was so fucking big, I felt like the Wizard of Oz. Like, I'm here to see the wizard. That's what I felt like. That's how big this fucking house was. The details. It wasn't a big house. It was the biggest house. The door, I felt like this. So how I feel and how I felt. I knock on this gigantic copper door with fucking this ornate columns on either side. I'm looking at this like a fucking Greek temple. Okay, the neighborhood, the house was so big, I felt this big. It was the craziest thing ever. The details. I walk in, we look in, I walk inside my yacht. There's a yacht story, right? Let me give you a good one, right? I walk in this, there they are, there's 8 people. They're sitting on a leopard print carpet. They have a thick dock rope. They've tied themselves to the dock rope, and there's decorative plates, vases are falling. I don't just say, and I walked in, they were sitting there, it was mayhem. That's not a story. It was disaster. The waves are so big, people were freaking out. I don't say people were feeling, and my wife turns to me and she flashes me this fucking look with the blue eyes. She says, you fucking killed us. Details is they leave out the details. When you read a really good, a well-written book, they describe a location to the point where you feel like you're in the location. The best person I've ever seen is Tom Wolfe. Tom Wolfe, if you ever read Tom Wolfe, he writes so well, he can describe a refrigerator and make it interesting, like the inside of an industrial refrigerator, and he actually makes it like, oh my God, I never knew a refrigerator could be that interesting. So what the point is that you can do this, but I think most people feel like people will get bored if I tell them what it was really like. I want to move quicker in my story. I don't want to bore them with the details. No, the devil is in the details. Let's go back to the story with Elliot. So here's how I would really tell the stories. All right, so we go up to Westchester, right, we get out of this truck. Elliot, he waddles up with his fucking stick in his ass. He waddles up to this fucking door. He goes like this. He goes, watch. He knocks. He gives you that confident knock. His chest is puffed out, and the woman opens the door. She's a kind-looking woman, and he says, hi, my name's Elliot. I deliver meat and seafood to your neighbors. I have a slam. And he goes, have a nice day. And he turns to me, Elliot, and he goes, that's fine, don't worry about it. And he goes right down the cobblestone, and he walks back, waddles up to the next door. Knock, knock. I tell you blow by blow. I don't just say to you, he knocked on 5 doors, and all the people slammed the door in their face. No one wanted the food. That's not a story. But that's what most people will do when they tell a story. They won't actually take you through the nitty gritty of what happened because they think that's what's boring. That's not what's boring. What's boring is when you tell a story with poor tonality, when you don't spend enough time describing the locations. You get it? In other words, our intuition very often of what we think makes something boring is not what makes it boring. What you think might make it boring is actually what makes the story interesting. All right? Provided that you do all the other things. Now remember, we study with a straight line, we study tonality, we study body language. Of course, those things matter. So if you can't tell a story in the tonality of like the teacher from Ferris Bueller's Day Off, remember that teacher? Right? You know, open up your book to page 4 of the smooth hall, right? You'll put people to fucking sleep like that, all right? So obviously things like tonality and body language matter, but in terms of the pure strategy of telling a story, okay? So let's move on now to the next one, all right? So the point is that when you're telling a story, remember, let's refresh, go back to the beginning one more time here, okay? While they're plugging it back in, I wanna make sure I don't miss a step, okay? So number 1, okay, is you start off, let's do it again. Frame a point, okay? And what I'd like you to do right now, everyone who's watching this, take 15 seconds here, all right? And everyone here, figure out a story. What's a story that you frequently tell in business? Let's make it a business story. It's something that you tell people, a very common story that illustrates how great your business is or what service you provide. A story you tell could be about customers or anything. It's a very typical story, and just think about what that story is right now, okay? And think about how you actually frame that point. In other words, for me, in business, I have very clear launching points to my stories. They come at the same time every time. Let me tell you a story about Eastman Kodak. I wrote the Eastman Kodak script. I know when I tell my stories, they don't happen at random times. They happen at specific times. Okay? So that's number 1. Is frame your point correctly. Number 2, okay, is your patent interrupt. What is your patent interrupt for your story? In other words, you gotta start your story with something that is not expected. Something that sort of just makes people say, what? Like, I wasn't expecting to hear that. That's what zeroes someone's attention into you. In other words, typically what happens is, remember, let's talk about like how real life works. We all move through the world, right? And we have a lot of things in our mind, right? And someone's talking to us, and we're kind of paying attention, maybe with like 60% of our attention, and the other 40% is talking about we forgot to do this. Very seldom do you have someone's complete attention. They listen to you, and they look at you, and they're thinking of 5 other things as they look at you. And you're probably all doing the same thing. People, that's how the human brains are. I focus on you, and my brain wanders at the same time. The purpose of a patent interrupt is by saying something that's out of the ordinary or outlandish, it makes the person say, what? And you grab 100% of their attention. That's the importance of a patent interrupt, okay? Next step, number 3, is tell a personal story. So, and again, the lesson here is that I want you to go in your own life, as a salesperson, as a business owner, what stories are you telling? You definitely are. If you're not, you have to start telling stories to illustrate your goods, your services, what you do, right? Tell about customers, but what stories are you telling, right? What points are you framing, all right? And make sure that if the story is not really a personal story, if you're telling someone else's story, start telling your own story about something that you were involved in, seen through your own 2 eyes. That's the key to successful storytelling, okay? Don't tell someone else's story. Next step in the process is you want to use active dialogue to tell the story, meaning you don't just tell a story about it all happened, and this person went and did that, and then they went and did there, and then they screamed, and this person. It's no, they turned to me and said X, Y, Z. And the second that you do that, you own the other person's attention. That's when you add dialogue into your story, that's the point where people really become engaged, because you're bringing it to life for them, okay? So always tell your story using dialogue, and 2, you tell your story in the moment. You don't tell the story past tense. It happened way back when, okay? Now let's go to the next step, okay, which is you want to make sure that you include details. Describe the locations. Describe what the people looked like. Describe how they walk, how they act, where they went. So don't just, people gloss over those details, and those details will really bring a story to life. Okay? So make sure you don't just, I think that the problem that we have with this is that most people think that if I tell too many details, I'll be boring. It's the opposite. It's the details of the story, the color, the richness, the texture. That's what makes the story interesting. Without that, the story is hollow. It's like the difference between, like, when you walk into like a town, one of those Hollywood, like, where there's just a storefront. There's nothing behind it, right? It lacks the same feel and depth and texture of when something's fully built out. You want to fully build out your locations for people, or else they don't. It's about getting them emotionally connected to what you do. Okay? Now, next step, number 7, is you want to bring the story back around to the lesson. And here's the point. In other words, the whole point is that you do this whole thing, you frame a point, you use all this stuff, you tell your story, but it has to then circle back down, so you essentially do what's called, you close a loop. So watch the story now with the penguin. He knocks on this door, that door, right? Slam, slam, slam. And he's still, have a nice day, stick tight in his ass, all positive, right? But then somewhere around 12:30, I noticed something strange. He gets out of the truck, and his shoulders slump over, his head comes down, and he starts walking. The stick falls out of his ass. He's walking all slow. And instead of that big, confident, knock, knock, he's like, we call it the non-closer's knock. Is that like, he's almost like scared to knock on the door. It's like the guy who dials the telephone so slow because he doesn't want to hear the next rejection, right? And he barely knocks, and the door opens up. And what should I do? And the door opens up, present tense. I always notice the things I do. The door opens up, and a kind-looking woman comes out. She says, "Can I help you?" And he goes, "You wouldn't want any filet mignon, shrimp ball, lobsters, right? I mean, the last 20 people all slammed the door. They said no, so I'm assuming you don't want it either, right?" Now, he didn't say those words. He didn't have to. They oozed out of every pore of his body. He lost his state of certainty. Because of rejection after rejection, he started so positive, but enough rejection, and his shoulders dropped, and it was just so obvious. And of course, that woman didn't buy, and for the rest of the day, no one bought as well. He didn't sell a single box of meat. And I will never, you don't remember everything that you see or go through, but I'll never forget that. I'll never forget that feeling of watching someone lose their state of certainty, and I swore to myself at that moment I would never let it happen to me. Next day, I get my own truck, right? So I drive up to that first big door, right? And I go on, I finish my story, right, by saying how first day I sold up the company, broke the record, blah, 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 right? And then that's blah, blah. And then I end the story now, but the point is this. What I learned from that, and what I've instilled in every salesperson I've ever trained and every salesperson I've ever managed, is that you cannot close if you are not in a state of certainty. Now, back in the days of Stratton, I didn't call it state management. We called it getting negative or not being positive, right? Now, scientifically, right, it's state management. All I can say to this is fucking crucial. Here's my lesson. You must learn to manage your state. And that is why the process I'm about to teach you is so crucial to your success. Because without the ability to manage your state, you cannot access the straight line at the highest level. Does that make sense to everyone? And they're all like, yeah, of course it does. Because I used a story to reinforce a point. So remember, I tell this whole story, but I don't just tell it for the sake of it. I loop back, and it's called I close my loop. I close my loop by telling you, and the moral of the story is, and that's why you can't do this. And then they say, now I see why you told me the story. You didn't tell it to waste my time or to divert. It made sense. So a story, if you tell the wrong story, it's just like it's not congruent. You can't do it. You have to have a story that actually where you, at the end of the day, and that's why I told you the story, and that's the moral. So it's not like so much the moral of the story is like the moral of the story is evident, and that's why I told you. That's what it means to close the loop, okay? And there's one step I want to do before I start doing the Q&A here, okay? And that is next, and I mentioned this casually as I was telling you the steps because it was so important, but you need to always recreate the tonality of the moment. In other words, the stories don't work without the right tonalities. That's why the entire straight line always comes into play. It's a communication strategy, all right? So in other words, when I'm telling you the story, I don't just say, and Elliot walked through the door and he said, "Hi, ma'am, do you want any?" I'm like, "Hi, you want any filet mignon?" I always create, Elliot looks at me and goes, "Listen, the key is, he got to be pumped and, I don't say, he said to me the key was to be pumped and positive. You'd say, all right, who gives a fuck, right? But instead I say, listen, the key, you got to be pumped and positive. I do my best to recreate Elliot's tonality. When you know who the best in the world this was? Robin Williams. Remember Robin Williams? Robin Williams would tell a story, and he'd almost be dying over how he imitated an old lady or a young guy, or Eddie Murphy was great at this, Chris Rock is great at it, you know? They have this way, and this is what great comedians do. They're storytellers. They tell you a story in a way where you don't have to sound like a woman, but you sound like the character of what that person, and it just brings people to the story. So the point is that the ability to tell a great story, not only does it allow you to sell more effectively, because, for instance, when I tell you, like, if I'm going to try to create certainty for, like, a stock, right? So I could tell you, Eastman Kodak, back in the day, I pitched many years ago, right? $140, right? Stock's 45, right? That's arithmetic. Okay, it makes sense. Take the company, break it up. You'll have $120 a share. The stock's 45. Okay, that's great, too. That's math. It's all logic. I said, but remember back in 1984 when the plant exploded in Bhopal, India, Union Carbide, remember that? And 13,000 Indians died. Well, guess what happened? The next day, the stock of Union Carbide dropped from 35 down to 4 because they got hit with lawsuits from everybody, right? 5 years later, when those lawsuits settled, the stock of Union Carbide ran to $68 a share, a massive winner. Texaco got sued by Pennzoil for patent infringement. Remember that? Okay? The day that lawsuit was filed, the stock of Texaco dropped from 61 down, I'm making up numbers there, down to 12. The day that lawsuit settled, the stock ran to $130. 400% gain. U.S. Steel was sued by Nippon Steel for patent infringement. That stock went to $6 a share. What happened the day that lawsuit settled? The stock ran from 6 to 110. Right now, Eastman Kodak is being sued by Polar for $1 billion. They have that much cash on their balance sheet waiting to settle the case. Let me ask you a question. What do you think is going to happen to the price of Kodak when the lawsuit gets settled and all the institutions go pouring back into the stock now? Where's the stock going to go? And they'll say, well, obviously it's going to go. I say, exactly. You tell a story. I tell you a story about a similar situation that's a perfect. Let me tell you about a customer I had. They were in a situation like yours. You know, the old way of handling objections. They feel, felt, found. I had a customer who felt like you did, right? Okay? And let me tell you what I found. Well, it doesn't work, but in the context of looping, when you tell someone, let me tell you about a customer I had to create certainty, tell them a story using the technique I taught you and watch what happens. People become so certain when they hear a story because the human brain, our DNA, we are wired to be able to extrapolate from a story to our own life because that's how we learned back in the caveman days. Nothing connects to your prospects more or to just the people you want to get into rapport with than telling a story. But make sure the story has a point that you frame, always frame first. It's the same thing as like when you ever go to a hypnotist show, right? Before you even walk in the arena, outside they'll be like, beware of strange things that will happen. They're telling you how you're going to feel. You're going to love this. This is going to freak you out. This is going to be a mind-bending experience. You have an experience. They're telling you what to expect. They pre-frame you. That's why you always pre-frame, tell someone what the point is that you're trying to make. It gives context to your story. If you just tell a story, they're like, what the fuck is this guy talking about? Always have a frame first. So you set the frame, you tell the story, and then close your loop at the end and bring it back to the moral and then continue on with where you are in the conversation. That's how you tell a story in a business setting, and it works like magic. It's an integral part of the straight line, and it also requires you to use other parts of the straight line in the sense that you need to be using the right tonality, the right body language, and so forth, okay? So with that, that's about 50 minutes or so, 55?
Lunch is here in about 5 minutes.
What's that?
Lunch is here.
Okay, good. So let's now do a Q&A first, okay? So you have the answer any questions coming in here?
Yes, a lot of questions.
All right, good. So let's start with a couple of questions, and we'll answer some questions here too.
All right, do you want to start with this one? We can't pronounce his name because it's community possible. But Madu Jip. Hey, JB, what are the most important skills you think a person should develop to be rich and successful? It's a pretty loaded question.
All right, Barry. So we're sitting here. Barry, come over here. So I got my friend Barry here. Barry's in the logistics business, owns a large company, incredibly successful entrepreneur. In fact, he was one of the 40 of Cranes, 40 under 40. So let's get Barry's perspective on the answer. What are the most successful, in your opinion, to become his question? Repeat the question. I want someone else to answer this.
To be successful,
Yeah.
what's the most important quality?
AJB,
What are the most important skills?
skills you think
Skills.
a person should develop to be rich and successful?
Well, you gotta be fearless. And you must never, you have to be willing to say yes. Right? State management, you gotta stay positive. Where am I supposed to be located, by the way?
Right here. Right here.
Okay.
Good.
And kind of going back to, your story that you told just now, by staying positive, it's allowed our business to be relatively, fast growing, and we've accomplished some amazing things along the way. My partner here, Al Simonian over here.
Say that, Al?
Come on over here. Come on over here.
Come over here. I'll sit over here.
And it's all about, because Al and I are convinced about the law of attraction and about positivity, and again, about saying yes. And the more you say yes, the more good comes. And so actually, kind of going back into a quick story, I'll try. So I'm gonna try to do what you did, right? So last year, I was nominated and won Ernst & Young Entrepreneur of the Year in Michigan, Northwest Ohio. And that led us to go to Palm Springs, where we met some amazing people who we interfaced with.
Played some great tennis there.
Played great tennis.
A lot of fun.
But what it led, by going and saying yes and putting myself out there with Al and taking meetings, could have easily said no, right? We met some amazing people, one of the wealthiest individuals, one of the top wealthiest families in the world there. They wanted to meet with us. Took the meeting. He said yes. He just said no. They then invited us to go to fly to an Indian reservation that was abandoned in Las Vegas, in the heart of the Grand Canyon this summer. And we almost died because a storm when we landed in the middle of nowhere, within 100 miles, it was snowing. It wasn't the big, like where the visitor center was. It was in the middle of nowhere. When we landed, they said there was a massive storm 5 miles away. And we said, we're going. Not turn around, we're going. Because why the hell not? Never say no, right?
Guys, now watch it. Now, let me interrupt. Let me pop something. So here's the point where you can make the story better. The point you should have said is, we get to this place, we meet this, and the wealthy person turns to me and he goes, guys, what did he say to you there?
So he says, he goes, well, when I was in Chicago, I didn't expect this was going to happen, but, it's all about the experience. Do you want to go? Do you want to continue the flight? We're in the helicopter into a sea of blackness.
Dishes were crashing.
Into a sea of blackness.
steak
And we said, let's go.
It's
We
not-
could have said no. We
the
said,
details.
let's go. Why? Never say no. It was exciting, right? So we land, and all of a sudden the storm hits. Because they said that's 5 miles away. It's not. It's going to go the other way. It comes straight at us. And meanwhile, when I was 24, I had a disease. I had my entire large intestine removed. So I'm in the middle with Al and like 6 people, in the middle with the Colorado, in the middle of nowhere, 100 miles from anything, with no bathroom, no nothing. This abandoned Indian reservation with these incredibly successful people and this incredibly successful entrepreneur and and family member of whatever, like
Holy
a
shit.
special family.
Are you answering this guy's question?
Sort of, I'm gonna get there. It's about saying yes. It's about saying yes.
Know where you want
Hold
to
on.
go.
Without saying yes.
Hold on.
Without
It's about
saying
saying yes. And I said, we're gonna have to spend the night here if we don't go. But they said, do you want to go? We said, we probably should get the hell out of here. So we left. But by being there, we built this rapport with all these people that we didn't know. Had we not done it, right, we wouldn't build a rapport. And so we left, and it was an incredible story. We've kept in touch. It's led to additional business opportunities because of that. It changed our perspective in the business to double down on yes, and since then, it's put us in situations that came out of nowhere, right? The law of attraction, it just kept leading to more and more and more between the summer and now, where by changing the thought process of letting fear control you in business, right? And knowing that doesn't get you anywhere, to say you charge forward regardless of the outcome, as long as you don't die.
No, listen,
Right?
he's making a great point. Listen, let me chime in here.
You're
Okay?
right.
No, listen, you're bringing in so many great points here into once. Here's the point, okay? Remember what I said, either it was in a whiteboard Wednesday or maybe in the last couple of days, I said about the law of attraction. It's real, but people bastardize this because they don't understand is that, yes, there is a law of attraction, and yes, it fucking works like magic, but not when you sit on your fucking couch. It happens when you take action and move towards the things that you want. The reason the law of attraction works for these guys is because they got up off their asses, they got in a plane and flew down somewhere. They went towards what they wanted. When you get into the vicinity of what you want, then you can attract it. You will never attract shit into your life by wishing it. What they're saying what he's really saying is that we take action. We don't live in fear. We move towards the things that we want, and because of that, we attract success into our life. And we also, as you can tell here, they paid a lot of money to be here. They never stop investing in their own personal growth. They're saying, you know what he said to me when he came in, he said, I want to be, he goes, you know why I'm doing this? Because I know something, it doesn't even matter, something will come from this, because every time I do something like this, something good comes from it. Every time I grow myself, invest in, it always works, right?
Every time that we have looked at an opportunity and said, okay, there's fear, but what's on the other side of fear, right? Something good has always happened. And when we got the opportunity to be here with you, which is, I remember seeing the movie and learning about it and watching 100 YouTube videos, and the whole thing, I was like, unbelievable human being, right? And then to get the opportunity to be here, I was never going to say no.
But
Because who the hell knows where it's going to lead?
here's the thing, though. I want to focus on one thing. His story. He told the story, right? Let me tell you a couple of tips how you can tell the story better, right? One thing I left out of my storytelling is that a big part of telling a great story is when do you enter into the story. The biggest mistake people make when they tell a story is they have a habit of entering into the story too early. In other words, what is your entry point into a story? When you're telling a story, say, okay, I tell a story about the meat and seafood business, right? And to go back and say it all started when my mother told me about, like I mentioned dental school for a second, but I moved past it and I entered the story when I walk into a warehouse and they put me on a truck. That's where I start my story. I could have started the story way before that. People have a tendency to enter the story at a point way too early. What you don't want to do is you can enter your stories in the middle, right before the lesson happens. Tell a rich story, but about the shortest time possible. So in other words, when a story drags on, it's very much because it's almost always because someone entered into the story too early. You could have started 3/4 of the way in and got to the same point. So tell a richer story about a shorter period of time, not not a summary of events over a long period of time, a very detailed analysis of a short period of time. I'll give you one more example, helicopter story, right? And then what I'm going to do here is, because I'm going to do another Q&A. We'll do a special Q&A this week, everybody, on Wednesday. Am I around Wednesday? When do we go? When do we leave? Okay, we're going to do it Tuesday night. We'll do another Q&A, because I want to end this Q&A after this, because we have so much going on. We'll do another Q&A, a special one for everyone on...
A bunch of questions, so we'll answer the rest
Yeah, I have so many questions. I'll answer them all on Tuesday, okay? You can tune in on Tuesday. We'll do it at 5 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. But let me just tell you one more story here, because I think it's important. Because he mentioned helicopters, and I want to explain to you, and he started chiming in about what was going on, right? So let me just tell you, I told the story, I think, a couple weeks ago in a Daily Motivation. Maybe some of you have seen it. I told the story in the context of about, very similar to about how people have a tendency to focus on what they're afraid of. And if you focus on what you're afraid of, where you don't want to go, you will crash into that. What these guys have become masters of, and why they have the fastest growing company in the country for a few years now in their industry. In the country. They're wildly successful, $100 million plus revenue, very successful, self-made guys, okay? So they're being modest, okay? They're a huge company, they do amazing, right? And they've mastered the art of not focusing on what they're afraid of, which is probably what you're doing if you're not succeeding in life. Human nature is to focus. You know, you see, it's the old story. It's always some fucking poor schnook, rich bastard in a Ferrari, all right? And he's driving in upstate New York, and there's 100 yards of open field this way, 100 yards of open field that way, and you see this guy in his fucking Ferrari, and he smashes into the tree. You're like, why the fuck did he had 100 yards here, why did he smash into the tree? And you know what it was? Because you look back 75 yards, and you saw skid marks. Because when he went into his skid and lost control of his beloved Ferrari, he's like, oh no, not the tree, not the tree. And he boom, into the tree. Because he focused on that one fucking thing he didn't want to crash into. Please, not the tree, no, not the tree. This way. Where you focus on, that's where your body takes you. That's where the law of attraction takes you. It's where nature takes you. Whatever you believe in, you have to resist the urge to focus on the negative. We want to, as boxers, when you're trained to be a boxer, which I'm not, but I know what it's about though, so I've taken lessons. The first thing they teach you is you can't close your eyes because you don't want, it's like the worst thing that can happen to a boxer is to get blindsided by a punch. A blindsided punch is what knocks you out because you don't brace for it. We want to look, so we want to see what we're afraid of, so that's that human nature to focus on that, right? But what happens is you focus on what you fear and you end up going right into it. When I learned to fly a helicopter, I told you the story, right? We have a process called auto rotation. It's what you do when you're up at altitude. If the engine dies, you can land a chopper without crashing. They show you how to do it. You spool down the engine, this is how you train for it, right? You go into a controlled 45-degree angle dive, and when you get 50 feet above the ground, you flare back on the stick, and it bleeds off the energy, right? And they say, focus ahead on the runway, and you'll skid to a landing. So I did that. I trained to that. I go up to altitude with the pilot next to me, right? He spools down the engine, right? And I go into my dive, right? I'm bleeding off airspeed. I get to 50 feet. I pull back on my stick, and I'm like, holy shit. And I'm looking at the ground because I'm scared I'm going to crash in. And I start crashing into the ground. He pushes my chin up, grabs the stick, pulls it back, and the helicopter glides, skids to a safe landing, right? And I couldn't believe it because I'm like, fuck, he told me not to focus down, but I still focused on the ground. Because when we're in that skid, in that dive, when we're careening out of control in life, when we have a bad turn of business, we focus on our worst fears happening. And because we focus on that, that's what we crash into. So I was like, fuck, let me do it again. Next time we go up to altitude, right? 1,000 feet, he turns off the engine, right? We start diving down. We get to 50 feet. And I say, this time I'm not going to do it. So I pull back. Sure enough, my fucking eyes look down. And I start this time yanks my chin up. All right, I pull back on the stick and I go to a safe land. I couldn't believe it. Did it again. Third time. Turn off the engine. I start gliding down, except this time I didn't look down. I looked straight ahead. I resisted the urge to look down. I pulled back and I went to a safe landing. Why? Because through practice, I conditioned a new pattern. You get it? You have to learn just by this practice. That's why the daily motivations. Why do you think every day I'm in your ear? Because I'm in your every day saying, don't fall into the trap. Don't get negative. Don't do that. A different message each day. Don't focus on what's wrong. Focus on what's right. Teach you better skills. Make sure that you feel confident about that. Managing, you get it? And after a while, just by sheer habit, you start looking ahead to where you want to go. What they've done, why they're so successful, is they've mastered the art of not saying no to things they should say yes to. Most people, you give them an amazing opportunity, And they'll say, oh, it's too far, it's inconvenient, what's the cost? And they say, you know what? No, we know we're great at what we do in business. We know that we know the business side of shit. So now it's just a matter of putting ourselves in positions to find opportunity. That's what it's about. It's getting yourself in positions to seize opportunity. That's what they've mastered the art. So I want you to think about your own life right now in the context of everything you do. You know, there's a funny movie, Jim Carrey, the yes person. Right?
Yes, man?
Yes, man, right? When he says he won't say no to anything, and it's a fight. But the point is well taken. In other words, people walk around living in the negative, in fear, and not wanting to seize opportunity. That's not how you become very successful in life. I'm a big believer in this. I said, listen, that shit won't work if you don't have the skills. That's why I always teach you the skills. When Barry said to me, he goes, you know what? The reason I use your stuff is because your stuff is actionable. It's real. You're the one guy that it's always real business skills, move forward. So yes, you have to have, so I'm not saying, yeah, just focus on be positive, la, fucking la. That's bullshit. That doesn't work. It's you have to know the skills to be successful, have the right strategies, and then also use the law of attraction and take massive action, go towards what you want, and that's how you fucking succeed in life. That's the bottom line. All right? Special Q&A Tuesday night, 5 p.m. We'll answer all your questions, any more you have, all right? Love you all, and we'll talk again on Tuesday.
Say
Take
goodbye,
care.
guys.
Bye.